Hello, Madina. Nice to see you. Um, we have a little conversation about the future of our planet. So, my starting point is that COVID-19, the pandemic, is a global phenomenon, and it affects all parts of the world and all layers of society. It, by trying to cope with it in different parts of the world, it has brought about a lot of changes of behavior. The key ones are the social distancing, more digital communication, and less face-to-face interaction. Now, my question is, how can positive lessons to be learned from this change for the post-COVID-19 new normal?
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your first good question, which is positive, and I like positive things, even though we are very critical to everything going on around the world, but we have to be optimistic for our future generations. So what I see, what's happening around the world, it's actually active, development of different global initiatives. So the people, they got time and to think about what's happening, and they started to collaborate using social media and different opportunities that information technologies provide us. For example, myself, I was invited to join different expert communities around the world, which was surprising because, for example, Expert Network, which was surprising because before people were doing some daily activities and they did not pay enough attention to the global challenge. But because now we're meeting this global challenge, I think people started to think about a need to unite and to come together to really push the global solution, which can have a local impact. That's what I see a positive thing. It's in general, if we talk about the individual behavior. But if we talk about the general impact of the isolation for our planet, I think it has a positive impact on our environment. For example, when we had a discussion with environmentalists around the world, and they see that actually biodiversity is changing, even though it was like 2 or 3 months of limited human impact, or let's say people stopped to visit some natural places or stopped to do some activities, the nature is recovering. So we see a lot of animals going back to cities, and they are actually, especially birds, and we can see that actually it's the nature is winning its space. Yeah. Another positive thing is that I see that actually a lot of information started to be provided for free. For example, there are many so-called paid online courses. They become free of charge. And a lot of companies started to spread the information about opportunities and knowledge. So because they stopped to do some maybe physical activities, they decided to do it online. And if it goes online, it becomes a kind of a public good for all, and all people can enjoy opportunity to improve their education, to take these free courses or download some free books. Especially I talk about children because they right now they are really they need to have physical activities, but they cannot, so they enjoy watching some free movies, and a lot of online products become a public good, which is interesting tendency. Even, for example, Routledge and different kind of publication houses, they introduced a great discounts for purchase of books. And in cities, many companies thinking about how we can continue doing our digital marketing and talk about our products and include some additional useful information for customers.
I thought those are very general points, and I think I'm glad to hear that you make the link between the pandemic and the climate change issues. I think they're very interdependent, and you have pointed out very rightly how quickly, in fact, these impacts can change. I would like to focus a little bit on your own activities, and so I think the impact of the COVID will range from geopolitical relations, which you deal with in one way, to ways of using cities, which is another part of your work, to neighborhoods, configurations, households, and even individual use of space. And I think we have to deal, we are planners, we are not omniscient, we are not scientists, we are not politicians, we are planners. So I think we should also see what can be our contribution to that. And I think what sort of lessons can we learn from the behavioral changes which have been brought about by COVID? And how can we apply those in a positive sense to improve the regional as well as the rural and urban digital divide?
Thank you for your very complex question. I will try to unpack it while answering. First of all, the planners, I think even before COVID, when we were discussing the Habitat 3, I already mentioned when we worked together with a special urban task force group that when we prepare our cities or we do a strategic planning and think about the future, we should not be very optimistic, and we should not think only about economic crisis or some external impact, but also we have to think about how to make our cities healthy. But people understanding of healthy cities is limited to, just measuring the level of health of, different people. But when we talk about healthy cities, I think we forget about urban epidemiology. So how this organic thing that we create, which is a kind of a living body, how this city can actually breathe, how get fresh water, how can utilize waste and continue developing and absorbing on the good things. Yeah, not only the poverty and pollution and all the consequences of the large cities we have right now. So here I would say that definitely we will switch our research focus and we will switch our planning, I think, objectives towards rethinking of how to make cities not only comfortable, because in the past we had to operate with some numerical, like so much square meters we need for this kind of, conditions, or we have to think about some economic indicators, but we will include definitely, or we must include some new indicators which will show us the quality of living in terms of sustainability, how we can create a healthy environment so that we don't afraid of any spread of any infection, not only COVID, because the cities right now are becoming kind of main polluters, unfortunately. And we see it from the countries with the high density populated cities, we see many cases, and in case of other countries where the low density, we see a different situation. So this actually all show us that we need to rethink our idea of the city if we want to be safe in the future. And when we talk about, for example, a space, even the measure of the space. So if in the past we were driven by a so-called capitalistic movement or increasing profit and densifying. So we wanted to densify, wanted to have high-rise buildings, we wanted to have many structures closer to each other, and we ignored some rules of isolation and rules of sanitation that actually we need to have enough sun, enough space, enough fresh air to keep, to be aware of and far from these bacteria, infections, and viruses. So now we have to return back to this idea of healthy spaces. And of course, I think that it's also about changing of interaction. So we will have to rethink what is the public space, what is the public transportation, how it should work, because right now in many countries, especially developing countries, public transportation is overload. So people are really staying on each other. And if we talk about public spaces are not enough. Sometimes there is no public spaces actually which we create. Because when we talk about social isolation, it's one thing, but also there should be a certain distance between the buildings where different people are actually packing in. And of course we have to rethink about this, but I'm thinking that it should start from rethinking about city strategy locally. So in this case, I think the global tendency will be to have global platforms between different local governments or representatives, like UN Habitat already started, so that local decision makers capacity increase their knowledge about how to change cities to stay against this kind of potential threat, which they have never ever experienced before COVID. So now they see what it is and how they can change the city. But of course, as we all know, the cities belong not to the government and not to the people. It's actually a lot of different actors and different interests involved. And of course, when we talk about, this switching from the idea of density to more isolation, there will be a place for a new economy, so digital economy, and maybe it will lead to decentralization of economic activities. So if some companies may try to leave the city, and people may think about leaving the city. In some countries, we already see this tendency that people are leaving the cities and going to the region, staying in some their summer houses or villas, but they want to be away from all this potential danger. So it can happen that there will be decentralization. And in this case, I would say that let's to be realistic and look at our urban and rural areas. And many governments around the world now started to recognize that rural areas are not well actually developed to stay against this kind of danger, whereas city dwellers started to leave the city and started to actually spread the infection toward the rural areas. And I'll just make example from Kazakhstan. If in urban areas there are, I would say, more than 60 physicians per 10,000 population, in rural areas it's like 4, sometimes 5 times less. So it means that actually the rural population will have a longer impact. And when we talk about, for example, isolation in urban and rural areas, I think the pace of impact was also different. So urban dwellers sometimes adjusted better to isolation than rural dwellers. First of all, because we have to understand that a lot of rural people, they are just working in these cities like labor migrants. And they are, when the cities were closed, they lost their jobs. On the other hand, these farmers or agriculture workers, they couldn't, they also lost some of the consumers. So the rural areas, they were highly impacted. And if we talk about isolation and distance learning, so when the educational institutions decided that they can continue online teaching, here we can see that actually rural teachers, they had a struggle in applying these methods because they don't have digital skills and they don't have access to internet. Sometimes they don't have even simple electricity or equipment to get to apply these new teaching techniques. that actually they must do according to the order of the national government. So, this always actually created a kind of a clear picture for decision makers that now they cannot ignore this digital urban-rural divide. So they cannot anymore live in illusion that everything is going well. So now they started to do a lot, try to reach and help rural dwellers or poor urban dwellers to be online. And many governments now thinking about how to enable affordable, broadband access to so-called value. And especially one thing I want to pay attention with the isolation in cities, that when we talk about, for example, isolation in cities, a great burden actually went on the shoulders of the woman who had to sit at home and take care of the whole family. And none of the governments around the world, they do some adjustment to the gender. And I, for example, see that they fully ignore some situation when in Central Asia, there can be 12 family members sitting at one place. And that, I mean, this is not, it cannot be called isolation, because they are sitting in a small apartment, but this is a family and they're big. So we have to rethink this idea of, what is isolation as a measure introduced, and realistically what could be implemented in fact, and how it actually in the future can be resolved. Because what is the current situation is that I didn't see that any of the city governments tried to adjust their vision or strategy. I didn't see that any of the local government asked for assistance from any expert groups, how the city can be adjusted or how the city can be changed. And I don't unfortunately see that someone is trying to measure implementation of this isolation. What is happening with the large families and how they are actually coping with this. Because in their case, this isolation is under the question. They are still together and they're still, densely packed in small house. And if we talk, for example, about, I think the last thing, I remember you said something about the future, future planning, yeah. I would say that some open questions for me and something that I would like to add a value and contribute to study is how could rural areas keep pace with digitalization? So how could they use the opportunities of digital age to come up with the solutions for development, to enjoy the benefit of urbanization? I would say that this is important, and I think a lot of scholars around the world will understand that when we study urban areas, we should not forget about region and everything around, which actually providing sources for the cities as a food, the human capacity, and etc. So I would say that when they closed the city, everybody saw how city is dependent from all environment around the city, so that we cannot actually close the city for a long time. And we see all the economic consequences and social consequences of this, 2 months, or the city is closed for 1 month or 2 months, yeah, how big this issue is. And this also allow us to rethink our idea of limited growth, so that we, as a planners, we always try to apply limits. Let's cut down the border, let's not allow migrants to come, let's close the city, let's have a compact city. So we can understand now that actually it's unnatural. Instead of this, we have to think about other measures which allows a natural balance, a natural exchange between the city and surroundings, including the rural areas or some small towns. So I think this is some lessons learned that we have to, take. Otherwise, nothing will change. I'm sorry, but it's true.
I would like to come to start from there and also take up a few of your points you made about basically the unequal access to digital infrastructure and technology and knowledge and know-how. And in this respect, because digitalization has had such an impact on trying to deal with the COVID-19, I think it might be a pertinent idea to look at a global institution which is dealing with that sort of inequality of digitalization and unequal access and so forth. And I was thinking of the role of the International Telecommunications Union of the one of the United Nations specialized organization, which has been active for many, many decades, in my experience, because I worked for them, to actually try to rebalance this digital divide, and especially to invest, even they have an arm which is technical, to invest in the poorest and the most remote areas, especially in Africa. So I would like to have your comments on what they have done in general, I mean, global term, and how you think they could now build on that in the light of this pandemic and all the impacts and the consequences of the impacts which you have mentioned, including the difference between access and infrastructure in rural areas, but also within cities, between the poor and the rich, and the people who have access to this technology and knowledge, and henceforth their opportunity to learn, to contribute to the economy, to the online economy and so forth. And that's why I think the ITU might have a role in that, and you may have views on this.
Yes, actually, I'm working very close with the Central Asian country, Afghanistan, and unfortunately, I see how over the 2 decades, the great amount of aid is going to this country, but there is no result. And I started to recognize why it's happening, and I can maybe relate it with your question to these global telecommunication companies. So I would say that if any service or product is delivered from the top, I'm not talking about the government, but anything from outside, and establish it locally, it does not bring any development. It's become artificial, and local people do not take care of it, and in many cases they don't have money to maintain it because it's too expensive and it's based on imported equipment, etc. For example, I can make a clear case of electricity supply, because we all understand that telecommunication is one thing, but in order to use this telecommunication, we need electricity, simply to charge all the equipment and run. And so what I think that global companies, they're doing a lot of interesting actions, but I respect only those actions which actually related to investing in building local capacities. When the telecommunication companies try to engage local people in developing of infrastructure, trying to utilize local materials, local human resources, and to increase the understanding of what telecommunication technologies can allow, and increase their innovation, creativity, and fantasy, and also supply them with the skills required to build, to run and also to maintain this new infrastructure, then I think this is a sustainable investment, and it will definitely have a long-term positive impact. But unfortunately, many actions of these global companies, they are similar to the action of the aid organizations. So that they, from their own perspective, they supply with only good they think that local communities need, without asking them in any case. And then they just provide this, And if something is not working, they just say, okay, they were not ready to accept it. So, but this is not an issue. Like in many cases, experts like we spent $1 billion on rebuilding the road, but then nobody took care. So this is because of the bad institutions, because the people don't care, because they are a developing country. But this is not a solution. There are some innovative entrepreneurs in India, for example, who they built themselves some satellite facilities to supply local, for example, women, or empower local women by providing them phones and access to telecommunication, and they see the effect. But why there is a result? Because they were engaged local community before providing goods. So they asked about what do you need, how you're going to use this telecommunication technology, what kind of benefits you expect from this technology, and how we can design it so that it will help you, I don't know, to produce new dairy product, to find a digital work somewhere else, or simply to navigate yourself in the area. Yeah. So and this will be good, because the telecommunication is just the tool. But first we have to know exactly for what purpose we need to use this tool. And so if there demand, and what kind of demand is it, and then if we understand the demand in different countries, we can actually supply these services better, more sustainable, I think, assistance, help, or then it can tease, so that different communities would like also to have this special, unique approach. This is, I think, we can, for example, get a feeling from what's happening in our countries in Central Asia, when the government is establishing dialogue with telecommunication technologies, and these companies asking government, so what do you need from us? So what exactly for people will use our technologies? Just for education? Or do you want us to supply them with more traffic so that they can run their businesses? What exactly we need? And the government, unfortunately, cannot provide a clear answer. And it means that we do not enough, we do not invest enough on understanding the demand from the communities, on understanding what specific use of this technology can be on local areas. And that's why I this kind of global, supply. I would prefer a global supply linked to the local demand.
I quite agree with your comments on the top-down approach from governments as well as from large-scale global corporations due to their own self-interest and so forth. But I think, and you have mentioned a few examples of alternative approaches which are more bottom-up, and I think especially related to the ITU, a few experiences which I have followed myself, is what they actually did in Africa. And when you look at the work of Martin Heyer, for example, who has studied that in detail and has spent quite some time in very remote areas in African countries, and several ones, is how precisely how the telecommunications, which is only one part of it, electricity is another one. You can't make it work without electricity. But so the local decentralized electricity generation has also been taking place at the same time, because there are no roads, there is no communications, there are huge distances and so on. So it has to be operated from the bottom up and locally for the local needs. But you have to have some means of exchange. So they have invented how they can actually exchange and use money in a different way through their own ATMs, which they solar powered, etc., among themselves, among the various communities and the network of communities. And that seems to have been working quite well. I mean, I have this information secondhand, but I think Heyer's experiences and how he presents them are hopeful. So I think what you're really touching upon is the relationship between the governments or those in power, those make the decisions from top down, and at those at the receiving end. And you need to have not only their cooperation, but their trust. And I quite agree that this building up that trust from the bottom up, which by the way is not just a rural or a third world issue. It is just, I could tell you about London, and there is no trust at the moment, or very little trust, between the government and people who are in the street demonstrating and say Black Lives Matter. This is just one example. So I think this is a huge issue, which again has become more apparent, more explicit. Maybe it's a good thing, so that we really have to address that, and the governments have to address that as well, and respond, not just push all these questions and issues and demands into the long grass. So how do we go about trying to change that?
Thank you. I am just looking at time. It seems that we've late with this question or one more. Because we got this instruction from Farnas to complete in 20 minutes, but we're already spending 30 minutes. But the question is good, because when we talk about planning of urban or rural development or regional, nowadays, of course, we have to recognize that our profession and our our duty as a planners more not to give our narrow expertise, rather to engage more and more stakeholders and understand different actors' interests and try to bridge them and balance. So now we are switching from the level of also technocratic advisors toward the level of mediators, which is not easy. And of course, that's why we have a great interest about different impacts, and COVID is one of the example. But here we're in between the society and the decision makers. And when we stay there in between, we see that a positive tendency that a lot of local governments around the world started to really develop some open access platforms for discussion. They tried to collect data, make it available. There is a big, a direction on transparent budget, and cities try to engage with this idea of smart cities and collect a lot of information. Not always really give it back to the people, but they really question about what we are doing, how we're consuming a space and our daily activities. But what is remaining, I think, absent, and maybe there will be positive change after dialogue, for instance, engaging not only government and society, but also engaging other different actors. For example, I was happy to see that the government started to provide online translation or live streaming of all the events, which formerly were closed. So now I can, for example, use live stream to watch how the German parliament or Kazakhstan parliament is working, which is like, I think, the great achievement. But it's only one-side observation. It's just like I'm watching TV. And as a citizen, I'm not satisfied with just accepting information. I actually want to have something to say. And that's why we see the rapid growth of different groups in social media. When people come together and start to lobby or advocate for some interesting projects, the alternative vision of city development and the alternative vision of how everything can change. And I think here, of course, I think the processes can go in parallel for a certain time. So I see that maybe because of their past dependency and lack of capacity and knowledge, maybe local governments and national governments will continue doing the same things and try to show up that they're trying to open for the public. But on the other hand, there is a great activism from the citizens, and we see sometimes, unfortunately, It's not civilized, it's aggressive, but sometimes it's civilized, so that we, for example, expert groups try to invite in Zoom sessions some governmental decision makers. And those decision makers, they cannot refuse because of the situation, because this is only channel, and they accept it. So in this isolation, they had to accept the situation. And of course, we use it, and we have a high-level dialogues going on around the world, which is promising. And I would say that here we just, for me, open question is that if digitalization will help to switch from government to governance. By governance, I mean when the different actors will be in charge of development, not only those who are in power, but the power will be equally distributed, and not power, but responsibility. So those who want to be part of development, they will take responsibility and they will carry on, rather than just some few people enjoying the power and then, you know, do whatever they want. Because now we can see that they're all weak. We're all human beings, and we're all equally weak against some, you know, danger like a virus. And this is a promising thing. At least I see it because I see how the global companies' behavior is changing, and they're trying to increase this, you know, feedback collection. So they started to be interested in engaging people. If in past it was just, you know, called public participation in brackets, now I see that actually they're allowing people to create their own coalitions, to show up with their own ideas and think, okay, what we can do with this, the decision makers. The people want this, but let's think about what we can do to help them. So I think now that we have equal positions. So I see promising, you know, this COVID and digitalization, you know, have a promising power to create horizontal platforms, and hopefully we'll be clever enough to use it properly and to communicate what exactly city needs.
I think we are asked to end our conversation, which I found extremely enlightening, as usual, with plenty of very good and practical ideas. And I do hope that in the near future, we will be able to experiment with some of those in real projects on the ground, and to get some proper feedback to see how practical they are and how useful they are and how well they can be applied by the local people for the local people, with maybe our help on demand.